Sammy Kershaw, Third Rate Romance. Before that, Celine Dion, Falling Into You, The Fifth Dimension with Aquarius, taking us back to the 60s. Kicked off that threesome, brought the time to almost 25 to 4. Fresh FM in your company, Pick and Pay's in-house feel-good radio station. A very good afternoon to you and a warm welcome to Pick and Pay. And we have a look now at the lead stories at the Cape Argus with today's news today, because by tomorrow it'll be too late. The Scorpions are investigating allegations that the luxurious Atlantic Beach golf estate near Melkbosstrand stole millions of litres of municipal water via an illegal underground feed from the water mains. Cycling icon Lance Armstrong jets into South Africa to launch a health and lifestyle program. A distraught waiter tells how he saw a helicopter plunge into the sea near Simonstown. It's a job shop day in the Cape Argus. If you're in the market for a new job, look no further than today's job shop. And in sport, Bafana Bafana lose to a lowly club as they prepare for the Africa Cup of Nations. Get all these and more stories in today's edition of the Cape Argus, on sale now near the checkouts at your Pick and Pay. The Cape Argus, with news you can use. What probably saved my bacon, literally and figuratively, is that the guy in the passenger seat was a safety expert from the mining business. And he's something about the scene didn't gel, and he said, no, we've got to go back, there's something wrong there, it doesn't look right. So they did, but by the time they turn around and come back, the car was on fire, so they parked on the other side of the road and ran across. And I apparently did have a seatbelt on, otherwise I probably wouldn't have survived, because it was basically a head-on at a... Yeah, so they hauled me out and dragged me up the road to a driveway just far enough away from the burning car, and then ran back to see if there was any body or anything else in the car that they could salvage, and it was over by then. It was too hot, and it basically then went up in flames. So 30 seconds later, they wouldn't have been able to get me out. So, oh, I hadn't turned around, I was out here. A number of times. Yeah, I have. Because it was a close call. I was quite badly hurt as well. So apart from the fact that they hauled me out of the fire in the nick of time, I punctured both lungs, broke all my ribs, and fractured skull, and wrecked my hip joint, and broken leg in 2 different places, and all sorts of other things, including the burns, obviously. Wasn't badly burnt, fortunately. That's the other amazing thing. I had a leather jacket on, and the photographs, you can see a distinct line from where my face and the back, or you can't see the back of my head, but that was quite badly burnt. That needed skin grafts and things. But it was, close. And anyway, and obviously the paramedics, being 5 minutes away from the Joburg General, were there in no time. So they stabilized me, and off I went to intensive care, or the trauma unit at the Joburg General, where I spent the next month or so. So, and that was the beginning of it, because when I came out of there, I was wrecked. I mean, I was on crutches for, as it turned out, for nearly 2 years, because I had a much more severe injury to my hip than they realized. And by the time they did realize it was too late. They couldn't really do anything. Anyway, it was a long... And one day, the surgeon actually at that stage said that the best thing I could really do at the time was to go to physio and try and get it as strong as I could, do it that way. And I was on the way to physio one day, and I hadn't really, although I wondered if there was some reason why I'd been spared this thing, or some purpose to still fulfill. I still wonder sometimes, but at the time I wasn't living particularly healthy life. I'd been probably, I think I had 6 general anesthetics within just a few months, different operations. And I was drinking and eating all the wrong stuff and partying and, basically cocking and smoking. Yeah. Cocking a snoot at it all, actually, hello. So, I wasn't well. And one day, and I was very weak, obviously, it took a lot out of me. And one day on the way to physio, I with a hangover, and I think I was smoking a cigarette, which I was finishing before I went into physio. I heard you on the radio talking. I've thought about it a lot because I remember various conversations you've had with personalities on the radio, including Harry Seftel. But this one was with Brian Oxley on Radio 5, because I was already a fledgling Radio 5 DJ in those days, and you had some dietitian lady on, and you were arguing, well, she was arguing about the merits of chocolate and stuff, and how your body can utilize anything it needs, so it doesn't matter what you feed it, it will turn it into whatever. And you were quite vociferous in your disagreement, and it caught me, stopped me, and I thought, wow, this is interesting. And I stayed in my car outside the physio, finishing a cigarette the very first time I heard you talk on the radio. And it was after that I sought you out. I found out from Brian, got your number, and I think within a few days or weeks of that, I got to meet you and Mark. But and then the beginning of me in the natural way. And I mean, obviously from really in a bad way physically, and with all the medication and the general anesthetics and the booze and eating unhealthily and sleeping all sorts of crazy hours and working crazy hours. By the time I was able to work again, I was a freelance at 5FM, or Radio 5 as it was known then, and all hours of the night and day. So anyway, that's how it started. And then I think I found out as much as I could in as short a time as I could from you about the natural way, and I went onto it pretty hardcore, as I recall. I stopped everything, and for about 3 weeks I was fine. And I even remember us having a conversation like, how was your detox? And I said, no, there's no detox. And you said, it's coming. And I said, no. And when it came in no uncertain terms. I was as sick as a dog for like 10 days. Wow, I remember how sick I was. But anyway, after that, I started to, every day got better. And I'll never forget, about 6 months after I got into it, and I was strict. I was following the principles, if you like, very closely, and I'd stopped smoking and drinking alcohol and was combining properly, and basically just doing all the right things. And 6 months later, it's just such a stark thought in my mind. Whenever I think back on my history of the natural way, this comes to mind. It was in the days when they used to broadcast the Grammy Awards live. So the only way you could see it without DSTV in those days was to go to a cinema where they had a live satellite feed, and the record companies used to put that on in those days. So there you'd be sitting at 3 a.m. watching the Grammys live in a cinema in Joburg. Anyway, and this particular morning, I'd been on the natural way for about 6 months, felt fine. I was a little tired. Who wouldn't be being dragged out of bed at 1 o'clock in the morning? But when it was all done, it was basically morning, and they'd put on this big breakfast. And there was lots of beautiful fruit and fruit juices and things, and of course the greasy fry-up as well. And I was quite happy to just drink the juices and eat the fruit, and marveled at how fantastic I felt, and just felt so alive. It's probably even though 6 months earlier I'd been in probably the worst physical state through no fault of my own, as well as my own fault, but in 6 months later probably the best I've ever been. So it's a very strong memory for me. And then over the years, I lived in England for 3 years after that. It wasn't always easy running a restaurant, as Mark will know, to stay on the straight and narrow. But I tried to, and I don't smoke. I've not smoked again, and I tend, some of the habits die hard. Like, I still combine, even if I'm not being particularly careful what I eat. I still normally combine it. And I drink alcohol occasionally, but the fitter that you get, the worse it affects you. I remember in your book, Mark was saying, be careful once you are well again and fit and healthy and detoxed, because you have a little drink up in a cocktail party or something, and for a week you man down, and that's what happens. I just don't overdo it anymore, because I know how sick I feel. So a glass of wine here and a beer or two there, but the beautiful thing about the natural way for me is not so much that you behave exceptionally well 24 days a week, 24 hours a day for the rest of your life. It's the reference that it's provided, and one of the things that, I've been good, but not strict.
Yeah. What Robin's actually just said here is very important, because there's the perception that if you go on the natural way, you've got to stay on the straight and narrow like 100% of the time and never deviate from it. And people are shocked when I say to them, I follow the natural way 90% of the time. We're human. And in effect, when we go off the rails, like when we go to the UK, you talk about going to the UK, they make the best ice cream there. Green and Black's organic ice cream is exceptional, but it's still loaded with sugar and cream. And, I'm going on my sort of annual 3 weeks of raw here and cleaning out from all of this Green and Black's ice cream I ate in the UK. It was like once a week, but it's still, still kind of affects you. You find that it didn't affect me immediately, but when you detox, you kind of find that there's some symptoms that are directly related to dairy and sugar. But I think that's what's important, is that you actually have a life. It's not a list of like no-nos and you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't. It's about making better choices, but understanding why. And I think that's what you said. It gives you a framework. I want you to carry on with your story, because it's the first time that I've actually heard it again in like 16 years, the whole details, because you told me all those years ago when I first met you. And I also want to know about the prognosis about your hip, because I know they said you needed to have hip replacement. How many more times, and you haven't had it once? You can just tell us a bit more about that.
Just on the point of it being a reference, I think that has been almost the most valuable thing, because like you say, I haven't. But the thing is that the more healthy lifestyle choices you make, the better you feel, the less you're likely to want to return to the old way. But if you do, through circumstance or whatever, or your love of pizza or whatever, the reference is there. So, and whenever I don't, and if I do stray and I come back, and I know how much better I'm going to feel when I'm back anyway, and I'm back in gym and drinking lots of good filtered water and training and eating the right food, and how fantastic I feel. So it's not, I don't waver for long or stray for long.
Stops you getting confused, because you've got this basic understanding of how your body works and why it works in a certain way. So it's kind of easy to understand. So every time there's a new fad or a pill or a potion that comes out, you don't get sidetracked by it. I find that a lot of people have said that. You just can be focused and get on with it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because it's all about nutrition, not about pills and potions in a bottle. So on the subject of the hip, the interesting thing was it was very badly damaged in the accident, but because the injury wasn't picked up immediately either, because when I was pulled out of the burning car, obviously they were more concerned about the fire than whatever damage I might have, because I was about out of here. So they had to get me out of the car more urgently than worry about what my injuries were. So whereas a paramedic would normally do it, check what injuries are sustained before they move the patient, these guys just wanted me out of the way of the fire. And what actually happened was that a fractured dislocated acetabulum came back in. So in other words, that the hip joint looked whole on the x-ray that night, although it had come out broken and come back in again. And it disintegrated over the period of the next 10 or 12 weeks while I was on crutches, well, not on crutches, I couldn't barely walk at all, but in plaster for the fractures in my leg. So when the plaster came off my leg, they discovered suddenly that this hip joint was completely disintegrated. It wasn't a joint, so there wasn't even a question of a hip replacement at that stage. It would have required a whole, they call it reconstruction. Yeah. So anyway, the best advice at the time was that leave it alone, because they reconstruct and do a hip replacement, then it would just mean that the next one would come due sooner. So I wasn't in any real pain at the time, and I had reasonable mobility, although by now they damaged some nerves also in the initial operation. It's a little bit confusing actually, but anyway. But when they first discovered the mistake, that they'd missed this acetabulum injury, they went in immediately to see whether they could recover the problem or do a hip replacement or something, and they just found this mangled mess. But in doing so, they damaged the sciatic nerve as well, which caused a permanent drop foot. So now I also had a permanent drop foot in addition to the fractured and messed up hip socket. So that obviously has caused a problem, because with the damaged nerves, I've lost nerve activity and muscle wastage and what have you. So I need, and my leg is now shorter, obviously, because the hip is not the same as the other one, and the leg's not the same length. But anyway, they did the best they could. A very good surgeon who I then was referred to after this mess, and he did a tendon transplant in my foot, which gives me a bit of mobility, and I use a walking stick. Anyway, and his his advice was just to leave it. The prognosis was, because there was a medical negligence suit over all of this, and the prognosis was that they would need to do the reconstruction and the first replacement within 10 years. And that would basically be necessitated by unbearable pain. It would get so immobile and so painful that it would basically become solid and immobile. They would then need to, and then basically my claim was calculated on, I think, 3 10-year periods after that. So the first one would have been 10 years, and then 10 years after that, and basically a lifetime of pain medication. That's the thing that spooked me more than anything. Yeah. Oh. They said it would be so painful that I would basically be on pain medication for the rest of them. So that was what I was dealt, So as I say, eventually I was on crutches before I could really walk again. In fact, I got a walking stick in England, and I only got to England in 93, and the accident was the end of 88. So it was 5 years later before I went off crutches onto a stick. And then I started, I got around on a stick, which I still do. And so having stayed close to the principles of the natural way, and my father has sworn exercise all his life. He's been quite a role model in the exercise, although he hasn't really, food-wise, the old steak and kidney pie generation. But exercise he's sworn by all his life. So I've always had that reference as well. Yeah. So with being on the natural way ever since, on and off, but mostly on, and exercising for the most part, but long periods where I didn't. Also, the UK thing, there was no swimming pool I could find nearby, and there was no gym anywhere nearby. So for 2 full years, I really didn't do much exercise. So it's been mostly on, but off as well. The 10 years came, and it was no worse. We're now 18 years later. Come June, it'll be 18 years, and it's no worse. And I saw an orthopedic surgeon not long ago just to get and he said, the original advice remains, leave it as long as you can, and comes the time you truly can't cope anymore, or the pain is too unbearable. But I should have been heading for my second hip replacement by now, and I haven't even had the first surgery yet, so I don't think that's an accident between the exercise and eating and living according to nature.
Are you still on painkillers or any medication at all?
No, I've actually, since I left the hospital, I had to go back for a 6-week period where they put me in traction in the hopes that they might, when they operated and damaged the sciatic nerve, in the hopes that they may be able to correct the problem, which they wouldn't. But I was on medication then, painkillers then, and nothing since. I've actually never taken a pain-killing pill for...
I just wanted to ask, has anything changed on the natural way? You're still following the basics, which you said. Are you doing anything differently as you've got older?
I'm a little more picky about where I buy my stuff nowadays, with GMO, and I'm just nervous about eating. So I try and find organic stuff where I can, but even now that's not always easy. Or shop where I know I'm going to get stuff, hopefully, that's not been genetically modified. And the other thing is, I started on AIM, Barley Life, mainly because I don't really eat a lot of dark green leafy vegetables, and I don't know how much good stuff there is in there. So that was the thing that made me start. And then after about a month, didn't really notice an enormous change, although I felt good, but it was quite subtle. It wasn't that I had come out of feeling really dreadful to now. It's not a stimulant, yeah. But now I'm on the garden trio. So I've added the ready beets and the carrots to just carrots. Is it called just carrots? To the Barley Life, and now I can feel the difference, definitely. Yeah. Just more vital, like more. I don't bounce out of bed any better. I've never been a good morning man. Almost since the days of the army, when I got tossed out of bed twice that I recall. Much too much. I just feel once I'm up and going, I never flag in the afternoons. I don't ever feel tired. I go to bed at night, not really tired, exhausted, just nicely tired, and fall asleep pretty immediately. Sleep like a bomb, and I can. The garden trio has made a difference, definitely. in the months after I'd begun the natural way, people could see an astonishing difference. So a lot of people would ask me, and so I probably had more influence on other people then. Now they just, as I stray from it and come back on, look and sound and much the same, I guess. So I try and talk about it as much as possible, and when people show an interest, we pursue it. But you also don't want to ram it down people's throats, because and a lot of people, until they understand the fundamentals of the natural way and what a beautiful natural way it is, they see it as another, people that don't know can sometimes see it as yet another fad or a different kind of diet, which it quite obviously isn't. But so I now that I'm a consultant with the natural way, that's going to help a lot, because now I have sort of officialness, if you like, and in a card that says this man knows what he's talking about, and if you'd like to know more, he's the man to speak to. Other than that, in a dinner party environment, why would I know any more about health and well-being than anybody else sitting around the table? So I think more so now. But there have been occasions over the years where I helped one lady lose quite a lot of weight quite dramatically by following the natural way. She refused to stop drinking wine. She said, I love my wine and I will have my wine every day. She still lost weight just by combining. So that was, and I'm sure she told lots of people about that, because she got lots of compliments about how good she was looking. So there have been those occasions, but
it's been great talking to you, Robin, and listening to how you literally went through the fire, I mean, in real terms. And if you're ever wandering around Pick n Pay in the Western Cape here in South Africa in the afternoons, that cool, what kind of voice is it? Calm. It's a calm, sounds like everything's going to be okay, in control voice. That's what it sounds like. You hear that voice in Pick n Pay in the Western Cape, the afternoons that you do, then you know that's Robin Clarke.